Hello, this is Ms. DB. In this video, we're going to go over the assignment on graphing and solving quadratic functions. And this is from 9.3 and 9.5 kind of combined. So one objective is to graph a quadratic function in the form y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And our other objective is to solve quadratic equations by graphing. So once you graph it, you can find the solution. So the y-intercept is the y-coordinate of the point where a graph intersects the y-axis. The x-coordinate of this point is always 0. So if you need to know what is the y-intercept of a quadratic function, it will be c. Because if you put in x equals 0 here and here, then all that's left is c. So you know one thing about a graph of a quadratic function right away, you know what its y-intercept will be. And here that shows that you can see that in this first example, the y-intercept is -2. And in the second example, the y-intercept is 4. And in this last example, the y-intercept is -3. So that's a really easy point to find on your graph right away. Here's some other things that we know how to do already for graphing a quadratic function. Now, we're not going to go through all of these steps on your worksheet, but this is how. These are things you already know about quadratic functions. You know how to find the axis of symmetry. You can take the little formula, -b over 2a, where b is -6 in this one, and a is 3. Substitute that in, and you can see that the axis of symmetry is at x equals 1. So that's one thing that we know. We can also find the vertex. We take that point, x equals 1, and we plug it back into the equation, and we solve to find what the y-coordinate of the vertex is. And when we do that, we get that the y-coordinate of the vertex is -2. So now we know the vertex is at 1, -2. So we've got the axis of symmetry, we've got the vertex. We can find the y-intercept because it's just c, so that's just 1. So we have lots of points that we can graph on our graph right now. We can find 2 more points by just plugging in some values. It's a good idea to find them on both sides of the axis of symmetry. So here they are just finding another point. And at x equals -1, they got y equals 10. And then they're going to use x equals -2, and they got y is equal to 25. So they've got a couple more points. So now we're going to graph all of these things on the coordinate system. All right, let's see. What do we want to graph first? The axis of symmetry is x equals 1. The y-intercept is 0, 1. We got that point. Our vertex is at 1, -2. And then these 2 purple points, these were the other points that we found by just plugging in a couple different values for x and finding what y would equal. Now, this is going to be a parabola. A quadratic equation, quadratic function is equal to a parabola. So that means that if this side looks like this, the other side will look like this too. So we can use symmetry. We can just reflect those points across the axis of symmetry and say, well, if there's this point, there's also this point. If there's this point, there's also this point, and so on. So this one, there'll be a point right there on the equal side. And then you make a nice smooth curve, and you've got your parabola. Now, those are the steps that you would do if you were graphing this by hand. But it also isn't just to graph, it's to tell us lots of information about the graph, like the axis of symmetry and the vertex and the y-intercept, things that we want to know anyway. Another thing that we want to know about when we graph, a lot of times we want to know what the x-intercepts are. Those are the solutions. So if you have a quadratic function and you set it equal to 0, now it's called a quadratic equation. So it's just now it's an equation, it's equal to 0. The reason we would do that is to find where are the x-intercepts. Okay, so we want to know when is y equal to 0, those are the x-intercepts. And if we can find where the x-intercepts are, those are called the zeros, or the solutions, or solving a quadratic equation. And we'll do that by graphing, and then in another assignment we'll do it by factoring. All right, so here's our first problem. 2x squared minus 18 equals 0. The first thing that you want to do is graph this. But as we've seen, graphing sometimes involves a lot of steps. We're going to use technology to graph, and it'll be a lot quicker. But so we're going to graph y equals 2x squared minus 18. And we'll do that by finding some different points. Wow, they found those really quick. So they found that the axis of symmetry is x equals 0. Because remember, the axis of symmetry is found by x equals negative b over 2a. And there was no b term, so they added plus 0x here. So b is 0, a is 2, but it doesn't even matter because 0 over anything is 0. So there's our axis of symmetry. The vertex, how did they get that? They plugged 0 into the equation because 0 is the x-coordinate of the vertex, and then you'd have 2 times 0 squared minus 18. 0 squared is 0, 2 times 0 is 0, so you're just left with negative 18 for the y-coordinate. And then they found these points by plugging them into the original equation too. So they just picked. They said, oh, let's do 2 and 3. So they said, okay, 2. So I'd put 2 in for x and solve. So 2 squared is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 minus 18 is negative 10. So when x equals 2, y equals negative 10. When x equals 3, then we plug that into the equation, we'd have y equals 2x squared, but x is 3 minus 18. So that's 2 times 9 minus 18, which is 18 minus 18, which is 0. So y equals 0. So here's 2 other points, and then they graphed them, and then they also reflected these points across the axis of symmetry, so they'd have more points. And I need to erase my... So you can see the graph. So here they have all of that graph. They've got the axis of symmetry at x equals 0. They've got the vertex at 0, negative 18. They've got the other points at negative 2, negative 10. And then they also did 2, 10, negative 10, sorry. And then they have the point 3, 0, and they have the point negative 3, 0. And then they graphed a nice smooth parabola. Once you have the graph, you can use that to help you find the zeros of the function. So we have one of them right here. One of the points that we found was when x equals 3 and y equals 0. That's one of our solutions to this quadratic equation. So now that you have the graph, you can look at the graph and see where it crosses the x-axis. And like I said, it looks like it's at 3 and negative 3, so you can check that by plugging it back into the original, and you'll see that it does, those are zeros. All right, this is just another example. This one's all messed up to begin with. The first thing you would have to do is write that in standard form. So in standard form, we would want to get all of these on one side. Right now they're all over the place. So we can add 12x to both sides, and we can subtract 18 from both sides. So now we have y equals negative 2x squared plus 12x minus 18. That's what all of this says. And then they went through the steps to find the axis of symmetry, x equals negative b over 2a. And then once you know what x is, you plug it back in to find the y value, and so on. So they've got their graph. It looks like that. And then where do you see the zeros at? It looks like there's only one 0 at 3. 3, 0 is one of the zeros. And sometimes there is only one 0 because it just touches the x-axis at one point. And then you would check that by plugging it back in, and we see that it is indeed a 0. And you can check it with the graphing calculator too. Now here's your equation. We're not going to be graphing these by hand. You can watch a video to see how we did that. That's what we went through. And also how to solve by graphing. And then we're going to either use Desmos.com or Sketchpad to graph rather than going through all of those steps to graphing. But we are going to answer questions like what is the vertex, what is the axis of symmetry, and so on. Here's an example of how you're going to solve these problems. Here's the problem, y equals 2x squared minus 2. So you can graph it right away, or you can figure out the answers to these questions first. It's up to you. The solutions, when you graph in Sketchpad, you can see that this looks like it's 1, 0, and -1, not quite 0. Sometimes Sketchpad, you can't get the point to be exactly where it's supposed to be, but this is really supposed to be at 0. So you would just assume that was 0. So again, you can look at you can first graph, just type in this into Sketchpad, this part of it. Once you type that in, you can look at this and say, it looks to me like the vertex is right here. Or you can find the vertex by the steps that we went through before. You first find the axis of symmetry, which is x equals -b over 2a. So this one would be 2x squared plus 0x. If there's no x term, you have to put a 0x there. And this would be at 0 then, because when you plug b equals 0 in, you get -0 over 4. So it's 0. We already did this problem, and then you would continue on once you know that x coordinate of the vertex is 0, then you can plug it into this equation, 2 times 0 squared plus 0x, or 0 times 0 minus 2, and you'll see that all of this, we get -2 for the y coordinate of the vertex. So the vertex is at 0, -2. And then here's the solutions right here and right here. You can find them by graphing and zooming in on your graph, and you can see that it's at -1 and 1 are the solutions. For the solutions, you only really need the 1 and the -1. You don't have to have the whole coordinate written out. And you certainly don't need the decimal points 0.00 part. All right, so on your worksheet, you're going to do several of these problems. You can either solve them in Sketchpad and then just type the answers right here, or you can use Desmos and then come back to the worksheet and type your answers in. If you use Desmos, you have to share your graph. You can either take a screenshot of it and paste it, or you can get a link. So let's do the first one in Desmos, and we'll do the next one in Sketchpad. Alright, so I have Desmos set up here, and our equation for number 1 was -x squared minus 4x minus 4. So you don't have to first find the vertex, find the axis. You can do that after you graph it. So here's my graph. I can move this around. I can zoom in and out. If I want to change the scale, I can go to the graph settings and change either the x or y, how far up or down you see the numbers. All right, let's see. I'm going to share my graph first so I don't forget. So when you go to share graph, you can copy this link, and then when you open up your worksheet, you can paste it right here. And I can click on that link and see your graph. Or back to Desmos, or you can take a screenshot of this with whatever tool you use to do that. I have a snipping tool that I can use. So I need to, here we go. I think I'll take a snip of the equation as well. And then I copy it, and then I can go to the worksheet. And if I didn't want to paste the link, I could paste the graph. The advantage of pasting the graph is that now I can answer the questions about it right from the same page, because I can see it. Oops, that's a little too far. All right, so let's see. We were supposed to say what the vertex is. Can you see what the vertex is from right here? We could go back to Desmos if you want. In Desmos, you can actually click where you think the vertex is, and a point actually appears. Maybe I should have waited to take the snip until I got there. So it looks like the vertex is at -2, 0. It also asked me for the axis of symmetry, which will be this straight up and down line. You can even graph that in Desmos. It would be x equals -2. There's the axis of symmetry. I'm also supposed to find the zeros, but there's only one zero, and it's right there. So I've got that part done. Was there anything else I needed to find? Let's take another snip of this. Because now I've got the axis of symmetry on there and the vertex on there. So I like this one better. I'm going to go back to my worksheet. I'm going to delete this one and put the better one on. There. So my axis of symmetry is x equals -2. My vertex is a little bit up here. Vertex is at -2, 0. This is a maximum. We learned about that in another previous lesson. Just means it's the highest point. And what is the solution or zeros? There's only one. It's at -2. So, oops, -2. You don't have to write the whole coordinate. You can just write -2. And that's it. That's all you have to do for this one. So for the next one, I said I would do this one in Sketchpad. So in the Sketchpad assignment, it's the same problems. Here's the one we just did. There's tabs down at the bottom so that you can go to each page separately. And now we're going to graph this one in Sketchpad. So it says to graph the quadratic equation y equals x squared minus 4. So x squared minus 4. And there's the graph. And then it says what is the vertex and so on. So to find the vertex, it looks like it's right here, right? You can click on that, make a point there, and then go to measure coordinates. Oops, I've got something else selected. Now I can do it. Measure coordinates. It looks like it's at 0, -4. Is this a maximum or minimum? That is a minimum because that's the lowest that the graph will ever go. What is the axis of symmetry? Well, that would be the vertex again, whoops, is at 0, -4. That means the axis of symmetry is x equals 0. It's right here. You can graph that if you want, but it's going to be hard to see because it's going to go right on top of this line. I mean, you could draw a line there if you want, though. Let's just draw a line like this. That's the axis of symmetry. Whoops. And that is at x equals 0. And then the solution. All right, so it looks to me like the solutions are here and here. Do you see how both this y equals 0 line and the parabola turn red? That's at the intersecting points. Another way you can do that, I'm going to undo those points, is you can select, you can select both the graph, the parabola, and the x-axis, and I can construct the intersections. And now those are for sure the exact points. And now I can tell what they are. They're at 2, 1, 2, and -2. So I could just go ahead and write them. Or if I'm not sure, I could do this. And I don't know why I'm using this Viner hand strange writing. But those are my solutions, or the zeros to the graph. But again, you could just type in -2 and 2 as well. And then you can see there's more problems to do, but they're all very, very similar. You can either use the Sketchpad, and if you use Sketchpad, then you just file, save this, and then submit it. Or you can use Desmos and paste into the worksheet as you go. It's up to you. And that's it. So have a great day, and let me know if you have any questions.